Have you ever noticed something strange? The more choices people are given, the more anxious they become. The more freedom society offers, the more people cling to rules, labels, trends, and authority. We grow up believing that human beings crave freedom. But what if that story is only half true? What if deep down many people don't actually want freedom at all? What if what they really want is to be relieved from the burden of choosing? Tonight, we're going to explore a difficult philosophical truth, not about intelligence, not about success, not about society rejecting deep thinkers, but about something far more uncomfortable: why freedom itself quietly terrifies us, and why most people unconsciously build their entire lives around escaping it. This is not a motivational story. It is a psychological and philosophical autopsy of modern human behavior, because if you truly understand what freedom demands from you, you may never look at your own comfort the same way again. Let's start with a simple question. If freedom is so valuable, why do people spend most of their lives trying to reduce it? Think about your daily routine, your habits, your work, your social roles, your online identity. How much of it was consciously chosen, and how much of it slowly formed because it felt safer to follow what already existed? Human beings love to say they want freedom, but watch how they behave. They want predictable careers, predictable relationships, predictable opinions, predictable beliefs, predictable versions of themselves. Because real freedom is not only the ability to choose, it is the responsibility to choose, and responsibility is far heavier than most people admit. Throughout history, philosophers have warned that freedom is not a gift. It is a psychological burden. When ancient societies lived under rigid hierarchies, traditions, and religious authority, life was brutal but simple. You did not need to invent yourself. You inherited your identity, your role, your purpose, your values, your path. You were not free, but you were certain, and certainty is emotionally soothing. Modern life removed many of those external structures, but it replaced them with something far more unstable: personal choice, self-definition, endless possibility. We call this progress, but psychologically, something else happened. We transferred the weight of meaning from the world onto the individual mind, and the human mind is not naturally designed to carry that weight without resistance. This is why anxiety has become one of the defining emotions of modern life, not because people are weak, but because freedom exposes something terrifying. There is no longer a single correct way to live. There is no guaranteed path. There is no authority that can fully absorb the responsibility for your existence. If your life is empty, it is no longer fate's fault. If your life feels wasted, it is no longer destiny's fault. If you are unfulfilled, there is no external structure left to blame. Freedom removes excuses, and excuses are emotional shelter. Here is the first uncomfortable truth. Freedom does not feel empowering at first. It feels destabilizing, because once you realize that you are free, you also realize that you are responsible for your direction, for your values, for your failures, for your compromises, for the person you allow yourself to become. Most people don't consciously reject freedom. They quietly avoid it. They bury it under routine, under tradition, under culture, under group identity, under trends, under ideology, under social expectations, under productivity, under distraction, because it is easier to inherit a life than to design one. This is where philosophy becomes brutally honest. Human beings are not only driven by the desire for happiness, they are driven by the desire to escape uncertainty. And freedom is uncertainty. When you are truly free, there is no longer a script. No role is guaranteed, no future is protected, no meaning is pre-installed. You must build it, and building meaning is psychologically exhausting. This is why many people secretly feel relieved when someone else tells them what to believe, what to value, who to hate, who to admire, what success looks like, what failure means, what a good life should resemble. It reduces cognitive tension. It compresses reality into something manageable. Freedom explodes reality. To understand this more clearly, look at how humans respond to structure. In school, students are given timetables, grading systems, and standardized goals. In work, employees are given targets, titles, performance metrics, and career ladders. In religion, people are given moral codes, life narratives, and ultimate explanations. In political identity, people are given clear enemies and simplified stories about the world. None of these systems exist purely to control. They also exist to psychologically stabilize. They give people a map, a frame, a story in which their suffering and effort can be placed. Freedom removes the map. It hands you an empty page. And most people do not experience an empty page as opportunity. They experience it as threat. Why? Because the human brain evolved in environments where survival depended on fitting into a group. Belonging was not emotional luxury, it was biological necessity. If you were expelled from the group, you were exposed to danger, isolation, starvation, death. Your nervous system still carries that ancient logic. Even today, your brain is far more sensitive to social rejection than to abstract personal fulfillment. This means something deeply disturbing. The desire to belong is often stronger than the desire to be authentic. Freedom threatens belonging because freedom allows deviation. Deviation risks rejection, and rejection still feels at a biological level like danger. This is why people often fear being different more than being wrong. Being wrong can be corrected. Being rejected threatens identity, so most people unconsciously shape themselves to fit their environment. Their language changes, their opinions soften, their curiosity narrows, their questions disappear. Their ambitions become socially acceptable versions of desire, not because they are unintelligent, but because their nervous system prioritizes safety over self-actualization. Freedom is psychologically unsafe. Belonging is emotionally stabilizing. This trade-off sits quietly beneath almost every major life decision. Now consider how modern society talks about freedom. We celebrate it in slogans. We post it in quotes. We sell it as lifestyle branding. But we rarely teach the inner discipline required to survive it. Freedom without psychological maturity becomes chaos. Freedom without self-awareness becomes anxiety. Freedom without meaning becomes emptiness. So instead of cultivating inner strength, modern culture offers endless external comfort, entertainment, consumption, social validation, endless scrolling, endless stimulation, endless noise, not to make people happy, but to keep them from sitting with the silence where freedom becomes visible. Because in silence, you begin to notice what you are avoiding. This is why many people become uncomfortable when they are not busy, not because they are lazy, but because stillness exposes internal disorder. Stillness removes distraction. Stillness confronts you with your unresolved questions, your unlived desires, your postponed courage, your neglected values, your quiet dissatisfaction. Freedom lives in stillness. So modern life eliminates stillness, not intentionally, but functionally. There is another uncomfortable dimension to freedom that philosophy exposes. Freedom creates moral responsibility. If your actions are truly your own, then you cannot hide behind circumstance forever. You cannot hide behind culture forever. You cannot hide behind upbringing forever. At some point, self-awareness becomes ethical pressure. You begin to notice where you participate in things you privately disagree with, where you tolerate systems that benefit you but harm others, where you stay silent to protect comfort, where you trade integrity for stability. Freedom turns compromise into conscious choice. And conscious choice creates guilt. This is why many people prefer moral simplicity. Black and white narratives, clear heroes, clear villains, clear rules, clear tribes, because complexity demands ethical effort, and ethical effort is exhausting. Philosophy has always warned that freedom without courage produces something worse than oppression. It produces voluntary submission. People choose authority not because they are forced, but because it relieves psychological strain. It offers clear identity, clear loyalty, clear boundaries, clear enemies, clear justification. It replaces existential uncertainty with collective certainty, even when that certainty is artificial, even when it is intellectually shallow, even when it is morally compromised. Certainty feels safer than freedom. Look carefully at how quickly people defend the systems they complain about, the job they hate, the lifestyle that drains them, the social norms that suffocate them, the expectations that exhaust them, the routines that numb them. Why? Because imagining alternatives is destabilizing. If another way of living is possible, then their current life becomes a choice, not a necessity, and choice creates regret. This is why one of the most painful philosophical realizations is this: many people are not trapped. They are settled into emotional convenience, settled into acceptable dissatisfaction, settled into manageable disappointment, settled into predictable frustration. Because deep change threatens identity continuity. It forces you to abandon the story you tell yourself about who you are. And human beings protect their personal narrative fiercely, even when that narrative is quietly destroying them. Now let's address a dangerous misunderstanding. This is not about becoming rebellious. It is not about rejecting society. It is not about abandoning responsibility. True freedom is not chaos. It is self-authorship. It is the ability to examine your beliefs before inheriting them, your ambitions before chasing them, your loyalties before defending them, your habits before repeating them, your fears before obeying them. Freedom does not remove structure. It requires you to build your own. And self-built structure is psychologically harder than inherited structure because you must constantly revise it, question it, improve it, defend it against both conformity and ego. There is a hidden paradox here. People think freedom means having more options, but psychologically, freedom actually means having stronger inner boundaries, the ability to say no, the ability to tolerate misunderstanding, the ability to withstand loneliness, the ability to endure uncertainty, the ability to walk without applause, the ability to exist without constant external validation. Without these capacities, more options simply produce more anxiety, more confusion, more indecision, more self-doubt. This explains why some people feel overwhelmed when their life becomes more flexible. Remote work, location independence, financial independence, creative freedom. At first, it feels exciting. Then it becomes paralyzing, because without imposed structure, you must become your own authority. You must decide when enough is enough, when rest becomes avoidance, when ambition becomes self-escape, when discipline becomes self-respect. Freedom turns self-management into existential labor. Another painful insight emerges here. Many people secretly measure the value of their life by how little inner conflict it produces. But a meaningful life produces tension, contradiction, growth pain, reevaluation, discomfort, uncertainty. Freedom forces you into permanent psychological negotiation with yourself. You cannot outsource that negotiation, not to institutions, not to ideologies, not to traditions, not to trends, not to influencers, not to leaders, not even to philosophy itself. Freedom means you must eventually become the interpreter of every system you use. This is why freedom is often postponed. I'll start living differently after I finish this phase, after I get stable, after I make enough money, after I get approval, after I reach a certain status. But there is always another phase, another delay, another justification, another protective layer, because deep down the real hesitation is not logistical, it is psychological. Freedom destabilizes identity comfort, and identity comfort is addictive. Let's be brutally honest for a moment. If you suddenly received complete freedom tomorrow, financial, social, geographical, professional, many of your current excuses would collapse. You would be forced to confront whether your dreams are real or simply comforting fantasies, whether your dissatisfaction is situational or internal, whether your fear is external or self-generated. Freedom is a mirror, and mirrors are emotionally dangerous. Now, here is the part most philosophy channels avoid, because it is not romantic, not poetic, not inspirational, but it is necessary. Freedom will not make you happier. It will make you more responsible for your unhappiness. It will remove many of the emotional buffers you use to soften regret. It will expose the ways you betray your own values. It will challenge your self-image. It will destabilize relationships built on shared avoidance. It will isolate you from people who depend on conformity for emotional safety. Freedom is not soft. It is clarifying. This is why truly free individuals often appear strange to others. Not rebellious, not aggressive, but internally anchored. They are less reactive, less performative, less desperate for agreement. less threatened by disagreement, less obsessed with approval, because their identity is not constantly negotiated through external feedback. They have learned to tolerate internal friction. They have learned to carry unanswered questions. They have learned to live without premature certainty. They have learned to remain present when meaning collapses and must be rebuilt. This is emotional endurance, not privilege. So how does one actually begin to practice freedom? Not as ideology, not as lifestyle branding, but as a psychological discipline. It starts with something extremely simple and extremely uncomfortable. You begin by questioning your automatic loyalties, your automatic opinions, your automatic ambitions, your automatic habits, your automatic judgments, not to destroy them, but to understand where they came from, whose expectations shaped them, which fears maintain them, which comforts protect them, which identities depend on them. Then you begin to examine how you use distraction, not morally, but functionally. What emotional state do you escape from most often? What feeling do you avoid sitting with? What question do you keep postponing? What desire do you keep minimizing? Freedom begins with emotional honesty, not political ideology, not intellectual superiority, not philosophical knowledge. Next, you learn to tolerate social discomfort. This is crucial. Freedom collapses if you cannot survive misunderstanding, if you cannot remain stable when people disapprove, if you cannot tolerate being misinterpreted, if you cannot resist constant explanation, if you cannot survive being temporarily alone in your values. Belonging will always compete with authenticity. You must decide which one governs your life. You also learn to slow your need for identity performance. You are not required to constantly define yourself, label yourself, position yourself, defend yourself. You are allowed to be incomplete, contradictory, unfinished. Philosophical maturity means allowing your worldview to evolve without turning every change into personal betrayal. Freedom requires psychological flexibility. Finally, you learn something that sounds small, but is extraordinarily difficult. You learn to sit with meaninglessness, not as depression, but as creative space. Not everything must be immediately useful. Not every experience must be optimized. Not every thought must become content. Not every feeling must become narrative. Meaning grows slowly, like understanding, like wisdom, like character. Freedom requires patience with ambiguity. Here's the truth no one prepares you for. Freedom is not something you achieve. It is something you continuously negotiate with your fear, with your desire for comfort, with your desire for belonging, with your desire for certainty, with your desire to be admired, with your desire to avoid responsibility, every day quietly, without applause. So if you feel restless, if you feel confined, if you feel surrounded by opportunity yet strangely immobilized, if you feel tired of pretending that comfort equals fulfillment, you are not broken. You are becoming aware of the psychological cost of safety, and awareness always comes before courage. The final question is not whether you deserve freedom. The real question is far more difficult. Are you willing to live without the emotional protections that make unfree lives easier to endure? Are you willing to build meaning without guarantees? Are you willing to carry uncertainty without immediately neutralizing it with distraction? Are you willing to become responsible for the direction of your own life without hiding behind systems that quietly choose for you? Freedom is not loud. It does not announce itself. It arrives as discomfort, as hesitation, as silence, as the slow collapse of borrowed certainty. And if you are brave enough to stay with that discomfort long enough, you may discover that the thing you thought you were afraid of was never freedom itself. It was the moment when you could no longer pretend that someone else was responsible for your life.